It's an early spring morning, but a severe storm has engulfed the bay. Poor visibility clouds the Sunshine SkyWay Bridge crossing. Drivers are unaware that there is no bridge in front of them, only an abyss and a deep blue sea. Florida is the place to be in springtime. Mild temperatures and sunny days attract millions of tourists to this part of the United States. However, today, May 9th, 1980, is different. A fog falls on Tampa Bay and the busy sea lane leading from the Gulf of Mexico to the Port of Tampa Bay. Captain John Lerro, at the helm of the Some Adventure carrier ship, knows he has to be very careful in maneuvering through the bay when the weather is terrible. En route toward the port, he has to pass underneath the Sunshine SkyWay Bridge. There is another vessel coming from the opposite direction, making him extra cautious. Then, out of nowhere, a gust hits the bay. Lerro can barely see anything in front of him, and his radar goes wild. It's best he stops the ship. Easier said than done, however, as the wind swings his vessel like a toy. Then he hits it, one of the Skyway Bridge pillars. From the pilothouse, John Lerro can only watch as the bridge collapses into the water. A tragedy is on the way. John Lerro had a wealth of experience as a pilot. During his career, he sailed all sorts of vessels from Japan and Europe to South Africa. At the time, he worked as a deputy harbor pilot and was to become a ship's master in a few days. His job was to safely take ships from the Gulf of Mexico to Tampa Bay. By the day of the disaster, he had performed the procedure on more than 800 occasions. He knew the bay as well as the back of his hand, but also knew how treacherous it could be, especially when the weather was bad. On the morning of the disaster, there was only a slight mist hovering over the bay. At 6:30 a.m., Iberian registered carrier ship Some Adventure stopped at Egmont Key to take Lerro on board. Upon taking control of the ship, Lerro directed it toward the Skyway Bridge. Unfortunately, the fog became denser, and the rain started to fall. In this area of the bay, where waters are shallow, bad weather could make maneuvering such a large vessel a problematic task. With another ship, tanker Pure Oil, leaving the port at the same time and heading toward the bridge, Lerro had to be extra careful. Before we get into what Lerro's ship has to do with the Skyway Bridge disaster, I want to tell you about today's sponsor. Do you like disaster documentaries like this one? Then Magellan TV is for you. I recommend watching Alive on Magellan TV. This well-researched documentary series tells disasters from the perspective of survivors who had the smarts and the raw human instinct to survive. The Wyoming ice cave episode follows the newlyweds Spencer and Jessica. Trapped miles under a mountain after an ice cave misadventure, they struggle through the dark, inventing ways to stay warm. Magellan TV is the documentary streaming service founded by filmmakers. When you sign up, you can choose from over 3,500 hours worth of full-length documentaries, and 15 to 20 new episodes are added every week. As a result, Magellan TV has the most varied history content available anywhere, covering ancient to modern history, science, space, and more. You can watch on your TV, laptop, or mobile device for as low as $4.99 per month. Magellan TV is offering Dark History viewers the first month of streaming for free to watch Alive and the rest of their extensive collection of history content. Click the link in the description to start your free month of documentaries today. And now, back to John Lerro on the Some Adventure. As he approached the bridge from the west at 7:18 a.m., heavier rain started to fall. With the precipitation constantly rising, Lerro reduced the speed from 12 miles per hour to only 6 miles per hour. 350 yards away from leading buoys placed to aim the navigation toward the bridge's main span, heavy rain turned into a blinding downpour, followed by strong winds hitting the ship. The visibility was reduced to barely 500 feet, and that's when the radar went wild. Because he could not see the buoys, Lerro sent 2 lookouts to the bow. At 7:28 a.m., one of the lookouts spotted the southern buoy 2A to the ship's port side. It meant some adventure was running south of the predicted course. Luckily, it was not by much. Assured that the wind was blowing from the southeast and in his favor, Lerro made a left turn to get the ship back on proper course. To his misfortune, the wind suddenly changed direction and started blowing from the northeast. Instead of getting back on course, the ship was sailing further from it. Even worse, Lerro was utterly unaware of it. At 7:32 a.m., he noticed one of the bridge's piers to his starboard side. He was just about to collide with it. Even though he was surprised to see the pier, Lerro kept his composure. He ordered the anchors to be dropped and reversed his engines to stop the ship. However, even though he ran slowly, he could not stop it. The wind, blowing from the northwest, was too strong. With the vessel being empty and riding high on the waves, it simply slid straight into the anchor arm Pier 2S of the bridge's southbound span at 7:33 a.m. The secondary support pier collapsed immediately upon impact, causing the 1,297-foot-long part of the bridge's main span to drop into the sea. Aware of the dangerous situation, Lerro immediately radioed the Coast Guard, screaming for help.
Emergency! All emergency equipment out to the Skyway Bridge. The vessel just hit the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge is down. Get all emergency equipment out to the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge is down. There's a mayday. Emergency situation. Stop the traffic on that Skyway Bridge.
Stopping the traffic straight away at a 14-mile route between two tolls was impossible, especially during the morning rush hour. At the moment of impact, hundreds of vehicles were still on the bridge. In one of them was Wesley McIntyre, a retired driver working part-time jobs to make ends meet. As he climbed the bridge and toward the central span, he felt his Ford Courier pickup bobbing up and down. The poor fellow thought it was the wind blowing through the bridge. Because of the fog and heavy rain, he didn't see the bridge collapsed in front of him. Then all of a sudden, his pickup plunged. Shocked, McIntyre hit the brakes, but he was already in the air. Before he realized what was happening, the vehicle fell off the ship's deck and bounced off into the water. Only when the car started to sink and fill with water did McIntyre come to his senses. He twisted the driver's door and squeezed out of the sinking vehicle. Luckily, McIntyre had been trained as a swimmer in the Navy, so he swam as hard as possible until he reached the surface. As he was gasping for air, the driver could see the entire main span of the bridge was missing. Only a yellow Buick sedan stood at the edge of the collapsed bridge. It was truly a miracle that he survived a 150-foot fall. Unfortunately, he was the only survivor of the 36 people that fell from the bridge. Along with his pickup, the collapsing structure took down 5 more cars, 1 truck, and a Greyhound bus with 23 passengers on board. After spending some time in the water, holding to a piece of floating metal, Wesley McIntyre was saved by a crew from some adventure, the very ship that caused him to end up in there. Inside the yellow car on the top of the bridge were Richard Hornbuckle and his 3 friends. When he saw the bridge missing in front of him, Richard hit the brakes. He managed to stop his car on a sloped section, only 14 inches from the edge. They were as near to death as one could be. With the engine still running, they all left the car and ran to safety. Not long after the collapse, the storm stopped, allowing rescue boats to arrive at the scene. The first to arrive was the Eckerd College Marine Rescue Team. Their effort was futile, though. There were no survivors to rescue, only dead bodies to recover. Soon, the Coast Guard arrived as well as the police and other rescue vehicles. By the time of their arrival, however, it was all over. They could only observe the scene and wonder how on earth it came to this. Bridges were designed to withstand the impact of ships, weren't they? The Skyway Bridge was opened to traffic on September 6, 1954, replacing a ferry crossing the Tampa Bay from Point Pinellas to Piney Point. The bridge consisted of 2 flanking deck truss spans and a steel cantilever span in between. The construction was 4.2 miles long and was carried by concrete piers set every 135 feet apart, except for the main span, where the piers were set at a distance of 864 feet. On both sides of the bridge, a long, low-level deck span connected it to the shores of Tampa Bay. The length of the entire project was 14 miles. In 1969, the construction of a twin bridge began right next to the existing one. Open to traffic in 1971, the new bridge was supposed to handle the southbound traffic, while the old one handled northbound traffic. The main span's vertical and horizontal clearances were 155 feet and 880 feet respectively. The seabed beneath it was dredged to a depth of 35 feet, allowing the largest ships to pass through the shipping lane. Piers holding the main span were massive concrete structures designed to withstand the impact of large vessels. To add to their protection, concrete fenders were installed. All in all, it was difficult for a ship to hit one of the central piers, let alone collapse it. However, the bridge designers should have considered a scenario where a ship would sail outside the main shipping lane, which is precisely what happened with some Adventure. The ship slammed not into the main span pier, but into an adjacent anchor arm, Pier 2S. The pier had no fenders and was of weaker construction, enough to be destroyed by the impact. Providing support to the flanking deck truss span and the anchor arm span, the pier was critical for the stability of the entire construction. When it collapsed, it dragged out the whole section of the bridge it was supporting. National Transportation Board investigators later determined that the Some Adventure's bulwark and forecastle hit the pier before its lower bow struck the pier crash wall. Crash walls are built at the base of the pier and are larger and stronger than the pier itself. Their role was to take a hit for the pier. If the crash wall on Pier 2S were a bit larger, it would have taken the initial impact of the ship, absorbed it, and redirected the ship so that its bulwark and forecastle would not strike the pier. The investigators also found that the bridge lacked a failure detection and warning system, which contributed to the fatal outcome of the tragedy. When the bridge section collapsed, the bus and 4 sedans were still a ways away from it. If the warning system had been installed and activated, it could have warned the drivers of the dangers ahead. This way, due to the heavy rainfall, they could not see a part of the bridge was missing and drove straight to their death. Ultimately, the National Transportation Board's study of the collapse determined that the main factor that contributed to the disaster was a severe storm. It was the squall, the sharp increase in wind speed that lasted for a couple of minutes, that caused the accident. John Lerro, at the helm of Some Adventure, was taking into account a southeast wind when he tried to redirect the ship back to the main shipping lane. However, a sudden squall changed the wind direction and started to blow from the northeast, pushing the ship straight into the anchor arm pier. In the given circumstances, there was nothing Lerro could do about it. In a 3-2 vote, the National Transportation Safety Board determined that the captain had only been partially responsible for the accident. The board's chairman stated he acted reasonably in the situation in which he found himself. As a conclusion to their study, the NTSB made a series of recommendations to the Federal Highway Administration that primarily referred to developing standards for the design, performance, and installation of bridge span failure detection and warning systems. In cooperation with the Coast Guard, the Federal Highway Administration was required to determine which bridges in the United States were not equipped with adequate structural pier protection and develop standards for their design. After the collapse, the bridge's southbound span was closed, with all traffic redirected onto the old span. The construction of a new replacement bridge began in 1983. It was opened on April 30, 1987. Consisting of a pair of long beam bridges with a central cable-stayed bridge, the new Sunshine SkyWay Bridge is entirely different than its predecessor. The main span construction is 1,200 feet wide, with a vertical clearance of 180 feet. As for the old bridge, its approaches were kept intact and turned into a fishing pier. The last person to drive over the bridge before it was demolished was Wesley McIntyre, accompanied by his wife. At the top of the main span, they drop 35 white carnations into the water in memory of the people who lost their lives in the 1980 Skyway Bridge disaster. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.